The signal had been dead for 2 centuries before Kalen Voss heard it breathe. Not the mechanical pulse of a repeating transmission, not the ghost echo of a long-dead ship's black box. A breath, warm, organic, terrified. It cut through the static of his navigation console like a knife through silk, and every hair on his forearm stood up at once. The beacon's identification code belonged to the Odysseus, a deep space colonization vessel that had vanished during the first diaspora, 200 years ago. Every search party had failed. Every theory had been exhausted. Pirates, stellar collapse, dimensional rift, mass psychosis. The Odysseus had become a cautionary tale told to cadets, a mystery with no answer, a grave with no coordinates, but now its beacon was breathing. Kalen's hands moved before his brain caught up, punching course corrections into the Event Horizon's navigation array. His freighter wasn't built for this. He carried medical supplies to fringe colonies, not answers to centuries-old disappearances. But the beacon wasn't asking. It was dying, each exhale fainter than the last, and somewhere out there in the black, someone was still alive. Or something was pretending to be. Computer, analyze transmission origin, cross-reference with historical fleet telemetry. The AI's response came flat, emotionless, and utterly wrong. Origin coordinates correspond to uncharted gravitational anomaly, designation Thetis 9, no known stellar bodies within 12 light years. Probability of signal degradation, 97%. Kalen had flown through enough anomalies to know that 3% was never a rounding error. It was a promise. He keyed the ship's intercom. "Mira, get to the cockpit. We're changing course." His co-pilot's voice crackled back, thick with sleep and irritation. "Voss, it's 300. The per diem on this run doesn't cover detours. The Odysseus just called for help." Silence. Then the sound of boots hitting deck plating. Mira Chen appeared 60 seconds later, hair wild, eyes sharp, already pulling up the beacon data on her own console. She stared at it for a long moment, then looked at him with an expression he'd never seen before. Fear, yes, but also something worse. Recognition. "This isn't possible," she said quietly. "I read the report. Every ship that went looking for the Odysseus either found nothing or never came back." Kalen had read the same reports, had memorized them in fact during his academy days when he'd become obsessed with the mystery. The Odysseus had carried 12,000 colonists, the finest minds of a generation, and a prototype propulsion system that had been classified so deeply that even the inquiry board couldn't access the full specifications. When it vanished, the Commonwealth had sent 3 rescue fleets. Only 2 returned, and their crews had been different, quiet, haunted. Several had committed suicide within the year, leaving notes about the silence between stars and what listens there. The 3rd fleet simply disappeared. "Maybe that's why we have to go," Kalen said, and he watched Mira's face cycle through every emotion a human being could experience in 5 seconds. Annoyance, fear, curiosity, resignation, and finally, a grim smile that told him everything he needed to know about the woman he'd chosen as his partner. "You're insane," she said. "Plot the course." The journey to Thetis 9 took 37 hours, and Kalen spent every one of them monitoring the beacon. It had stopped breathing within the first hour, reverting to the standard automated pulse, a cold mathematical repetition of the Odysseus's registry and emergency code. But Kalen had recorded the breath, had played it back 100 times, analyzing each millisecond of audio. The waveform didn't match any known human voice pattern. It was too low, too resonant, as if the sound had traveled through water before reaching his ship, or through something thicker, something alive. On the 38th hour, the Event Horizon dropped out of FTL, and Kalen understood why search parties had gone mad. Thetis 9 wasn't an anomaly. It was a graveyard. The ships hung in the black like frozen tears, dozens of them, hundreds, their hulls dark and ancient, arranged in a spiral pattern that made Kalen's eyes water when he tried to trace it. Commonwealth vessels, yes, but also designs he didn't recognize. Curved hulls covered in what looked like bone. Triangular ships with no visible engines. A sphere the size of a small moon. Its surface covered in symbols that seemed to writhe when viewed from the corner of his vision. And at the center of it all, the Odysseus. Even after 2 centuries, the colonization vessel was unmistakable. A massive ring design. Its central axis designed to spin for artificial gravity, now frozen in place. Its hull was intact. Its lights were on. "There's atmosphere," Mira whispered, reading her sensors. "Breathable, temperature within human tolerance, and life signs." Kalen's heart stopped. "How many?" "1, maybe 2. The readings are inconsistent, like the signatures are phasing in and out of existence." She turned to face him, and he saw the co-pilot's mask slip for just a moment. Underneath, Mira looked like a little girl who'd just seen a ghost. "Kyle, something's wrong with this place. The mass readings don't add up. There's something here that doesn't register on any of my instruments. Something big." "The beacon," Kalen said slowly. "It wasn't broadcasting for help. It was broadcasting a warning." Then why did we hear breathing? He didn't have an answer, but he was going to find one. The Odysseus's docking bay opened for them without resistance, its ancient systems somehow still powered after 2 centuries. The air inside tasted metallic and sweet, like old blood mixed with honey, and Kalen's suit sensors registered trace compounds that didn't match any known atmospheric profile. Mira kept her hand on her sidearm. Kalen kept his on the flashlight mounted to his helmet, sweeping the darkness for threats. They found none. What they found was worse. The bay was empty. Not abandoned. Empty, as if the 12,000 colonists had simply ceased to exist in the middle of their daily routines. Cargo containers sat half unloaded. A maintenance drone hung suspended from its charging cradle, its optical sensors still blinking. On the far wall, a mural depicted the Odysseus's launch from Earth, the crowd cheering, the sky burning blue and hopeful. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. "Maybe they evacuated," Mira offered, her voice too loud in the silence. "Into what?" Kalen pointed at the bay's massive viewport, which stared out into the ship graveyard. "There's nothing out there for light years. No planets, no stations, no escape pods." He walked to a nearby terminal and pressed the activation key. The screen flickered, sparked, then flared to life, and immediately began displaying a message that had apparently been waiting for 200 years. "If you are reading this, you have already made a mistake. The beacon is not a beacon, it is a trap. They are not colonists, they are hunters. Do not follow the breathing. Do not follow the breathing. Do not follow the text repeated thousands of times, scrolling so fast it became a blur. Kalen forced himself to look away, to breathe, to think. Behind him, Mira had gone very still. "Kale," she said quietly. "The life signs, they're moving." He turned. His own sensors showed 2 signatures now, converging on their position from different directions. One moved with the steady mechanical precision of a machine. The other didn't. It flickered, teleported, appeared and disappeared in ways that violated causality. "They're not human," Kalen said. It wasn't a question. "No," a voice answered from the shadows. "But they used to be." The woman who stepped into the light had once been named Ilara Vance, chief xenobiologist of the Odysseus colonization mission. Now she was something else entirely. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, revealing networks of golden filament beneath, wires or nerves, or something that was both. Her eyes glowed faintly amber, and when she smiled, Kalen saw that her teeth had been replaced with small perfect nodes of black crystal. "You're human," Mira said, her sidearm rising. "Mostly." "Was." Ilara's voice carried the same resonant quality as the beacon's breath, as if she were speaking from the bottom of an ocean. "Now I am. A bridge. A compromise. A warning that arrived 200 years too late." She looked past them, through the viewport, at the spiral of dead ships. "They were here before we arrived. Waiting. always waiting. The Odysseus didn't crash. It was invited. Kalen forced his hands to stop shaking. Who are they? Ilara pointed at the sphere with the writhing symbols. The listeners. They exist in the spaces between thoughts, in the gaps between heartbeats. They cannot enter our reality unless we invite them, unless we think about them in the right way. Her smile turned bitter. My team discovered their language embedded in cosmic background radiation. We thought it was a message, a greeting, a chance for first contact. And we translated it, spoke it, sang it in the ship's resonance chambers during the festival of the voyage's midpoint. Ilara's glowing eyes dimmed. The listeners came through the music, through our voices. They don't eat flesh or drink blood. They consume attention, focus, consciousness itself. Everyone who heard the song became hollowed out. Their minds stretched thin across the hull of the ship, still aware, still screaming, but unable to move or speak or die. Kalen felt the blood drain from his face. The life signs, the ones phasing in and out, are the colonists. Their attention keeps slipping in and out of reality as the listeners feed. Most of them have been reduced to single emotions by now. Fear, hunger, loneliness, repeating forever, unable to form a complete thought. Ilara gestured at her own transformed body. I was the first to find a defense. The golden filaments are listeners I managed to trap inside my own nervous system. They give me power, yes. They also keep me here, aware, as the centuries crawl by. Mira lowered her weapon. Why didn't you just destroy the ship, kill yourselves? Anything would be better than this, because the listeners learn to reproduce. Every mind they hollow becomes a nursery for new listeners. If we had died, the infants would have scattered across the galaxy, searching for new thoughts to consume. Ilara's voice cracked. So we stayed. We kept them here, feeding on us generation after generation of our own suffering. The beacon was a lie we built into the trap. Every time someone answered it, the listeners would have a fresh meal. But you're the first in 60 years. Kalen's blood ran cold. The search parties, the ones that disappeared, fed well. The listeners grew strong. They began reaching out not through beacons but through dreams, through coincidences, through the quiet impulses that tell you to take a different route home or call an old friend. Ilara stepped closer and Kalen saw that she wasn't quite touching the floor. The galaxy is full of ghosts, pilot. Most of them are just echoes of the listeners, whispering suggestions to anyone who will listen. Why are you telling us this? Mira demanded. If we're supposed to be food, why warn us? Ilara reached out and touched Kalen's face. Her hand was warm, almost feverish, and the golden filaments pulsed beneath her skin. Because you're different. You heard the breath, not the pulse. The listeners didn't call you. I did. Through the beacon, through 200 years of practice, I found a way to send a message they couldn't intercept. A human voice, a human fear. She pulled her hand back, and Kalen felt something pass between them. A memory, a warning, a map. I need you to do what we couldn't. I need you to close the door. The door, Ilara explained as she led them deeper into the Odysseus, wasn't a physical object. It was a concept, a resonance frequency, a specific pattern of neural activity that the listeners had exploited to enter reality in the first place. Closing it required someone to broadcast the counter-frequency, a song of pure, focused selfhood that would repel the listeners and seal the breach between dimensions. But there was a catch. The broadcaster must be inside the breach, Ilara said, stopping before a massive set of doors that pulsed with golden light. Surrounded by the listeners, consumed by them, and then they must fight their way back to themselves, pulling the dimensional wound closed from within. Mira grabbed Kalen's arm. That's suicide. It's worse than suicide, Ilara agreed. It's an eternity of being unmade and remade, second by second, as your consciousness battles entities that have been feeding on human minds for 2 centuries. Most of the colonists who tried failed within the first minute. Their attention shattered. Their identities became soup. She looked at Kalen with something like pity. But you have something they didn't. You have distance. You weren't here when the listeners first arrived. Your mind isn't already compromised by their presence. If anyone can do this, it's someone who just got here. Kalen thought about the breath, about the fear in that single exhalation, transmitted across 200 years and countless light years, about Ilara, who had spent centuries trapped in her own body, watching her friends become ghosts, just to keep the listeners from spreading. What happens if I fail? The listeners consume you, learn from your failure and become stronger. Within a decade, they'll have enough power to reach Earth. Ilara's glowing eyes met his. Within a century, they'll have hollowed out every human mind in the galaxy. We'll become a species of empty shells, still breathing, still moving, but gone inside. And the listeners will use our bodies to hunt for new prey among the stars. Mira was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. There has to be another way. We can call the Commonwealth, bring a fleet, blow this entire sector into dust. The listeners exist between dimensions, Ilara said gently. Physical destruction doesn't touch them. It only scatters them, makes them harder to contain. No. She placed her hand on the golden doors. The only way to stop them is to go inside and refuse to be eaten. To hold on to yourself so tightly that they choke on your identity. To become a poison they can't digest. Kalen looked at Mira. At the woman who'd followed him into madness without hesitation. Who'd trusted him even when every instinct screamed otherwise. He thought about the cargo hold full of medical supplies, about the colony that would go untreated if he didn't make his delivery, about all the other beacons scattered across the galaxy, silent or screaming, each one a potential doorway for something worse. "Give me the frequency," he said. The breach was beautiful. Kalen had expected darkness, chaos, screaming. Instead, he found himself floating in an infinite expanse of amber light, surrounded by shapes that were almost familiar. Human faces, human hands, human bodies, all blurred and stretched and wrong. The listeners didn't look like monsters. They looked like memories. Every person he'd ever loved, every face he'd ever seen in passing, every stranger on every station and planet and ship, they whispered to him in voices he recognized. His mother telling him to rest. His first commanding officer praising his skill. Mira laughing at one of his terrible jokes. The colonists who'd been hollowed out, offering him peace, offering him release, offering him a chance to finally stop running. "You've been alone so long," they murmured. "Just let go. Just drift. We'll take care of everything." Kalen felt his attention waver, felt his identity begin to fray at the edges, memories bleeding into each other, past and present losing their distinction. He was a child again, watching his father leave for a war he wouldn't survive. He was a cadet, failing his first flight exam. He was an old man, dying alone in a hospital bed that smelled of antiseptic and regret. "Yes," the listeners purred. "That's it. That's all you are. That's all anyone is. Just pain and loss and fear repeated forever. Let us take it from you. Let us make it quiet." Kalen almost did. Almost surrendered to the amber tide, to the promise of oblivion, to the seductive silence of a mind finally at rest. Then he remembered the breath, not the one from the beacon, the one he had taken seconds before answering the call. The sharp inhale of a man who'd made a choice, who'd decided to risk everything on the chance that someone out there needed help. That breath hadn't been fear. It had been defiance, a refusal to let the universe be cruel without protest. He focused on that breath, on the feeling of air filling his lungs, of his heart beating in his chest, of his hands gripping the arms of his pilot's chair. He was Kalen Voss. He was 37 years old. He had a scar on his left palm from a childhood accident, a tattoo on his right shoulder of a bird in flight, and a habit of humming old Earth songs when he was nervous. "I am here," he thought. "I am real. You are not." The listeners screamed. It wasn't a physical sound, it was a psychic feedback loop, a billion tiny hooks being torn out of his consciousness all at once. The golden light flickered, dimmed, and Kalen saw what lay beneath. A vast, writhing mass of want, of hunger, of need so profound It had become its own kind of consciousness. The listeners weren't evil. They were starving. And for the first time in their existence, something had refused to be their meal. "Impossible!" they shrieked. "You are fragile. You are brief. You are a spark in the dark. We have consumed empires. We have devoured worlds. We are older than your species, older than your sun, older than the concept of light itself." Kalen felt himself slipping again, pulled toward the gravity of their age, their scale, their unimaginable experience. What was one human against something that had existed before stars? What was his defiance against the accumulated hunger of eons? Then he laughed, not because it was funny, because he'd finally understood something the listeners had missed in all their ancient wisdom, something Alara had shown him, without meaning to. "You consumed the colonists," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "You hollowed them out and left only echoes. But those echoes, they still reached out. They built a beacon. They sent a message. Across 200 years, across your feeding grounds, across your best efforts, a ghost screamed for help." The listeners writhed. The golden light pulsed erratically. Those were fragments, memories without power, echoes without substance. "Those were people," Kalen said. "People you couldn't fully digest. People who kept a piece of themselves hidden, even from you. People who waited 2 centuries for someone to hear them." He spread his arms wide, embracing the breach, embracing the amber chaos. "You think we're fragile? You think we're brief? We're the only things in this universe that can choose to suffer. We're the only things that can look at eternity and say, 'No, I'd rather be a spark.'" He began to hum. It was an old Earth song, one his mother had taught him before she died. A lullaby, slow and simple, about the moon and the tide, and the way love outlasted everything else. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a counter-frequency or a dimensional seal or any of the things Alara had described. It was just a song. A human song. A song that had been passed down through generations, surviving wars and famines, and the collapse of civilizations. Because some melodies were too stubborn to die. The listeners recoiled as if burned. "Stop. That frequency. It hurts. It burns. It makes us feel." Kalen kept humming. Louder now, stronger, pulling every memory of joy and grief and desperate hope into the melody. He thought of Mira's smile, of the first time he'd seen a sunrise on an alien world, of the way his father had held him, just once, before walking out the door forever. All of it poured into the song, a flood of human experience too dense, too real for the listeners to consume. The golden light began to crack, to splinter, to reveal the darkness beneath, not the hungry darkness of the breach, but the ordinary darkness of empty space, of vacuum, of a universe that didn't care and never had. The listeners shrieked and thrashed, their forms dissolving as Kalen's song tore through them like sunlight through fog. "We will remember this," they hissed, their voices fading. "We will remember you. We will wait. We are patient. Your species is brief. We will be here when you fall." "Maybe," Kalen said, still humming. "But you'll be here alone. Because we're not falling today." The breach collapsed. He woke up on the floor of the Odysseus's docking bay, with Mira's arms wrapped around him and Alara's golden filaments crumbling to dust. "You did it," Mira whispered, crying and laughing at the same time. "You insane bastard, you actually did it." Kalen tried to speak, but his throat was raw, his lungs burning, his entire body trembling with exhaustion. He settled for squeezing Mira's hand and turning his head toward Alara. The xenobiologist was fading. Her translucent skin was becoming opaque again, the golden nodes falling from her teeth like dead stars. She looked almost human now, tired, ancient, heartbreakingly fragile. "The colonists?" Kalen managed. Alara smiled. It was the first genuine expression he'd seen on her face. Gone. Truly gone. This time. Their suffering ended when the breach closed. Their At peace. But you're not. No. She looked down at her hands, where the last traces of golden filament were flickering out. I was bound to the listeners for too long. When they retreated, they took most of me with them. I have minutes, perhaps. Maybe less. Mira started to protest, but Alara raised a hand. Don't. I've been waiting for this for 200 years. The only thing I regret is that I couldn't save more of them. She looked at Kaylin, and her eyes were warm now, human-colored, real. You asked me why I called you specifically, why I thought you could succeed where so many others failed. Kaylin nodded, not trusting his voice. Because you're human, Alara said simply. Not because of your courage or your cleverness or your stubborn refusal to die, because of your loneliness. Every species in the galaxy has learned to fear the silence between stars. They build walls around their minds, suppress their emotions, avoid anything that might attract the listener's attention. But humans, she laughed, a thin, tired sound. Humans reach out. Humans hope. Humans send beacons into the dark and wait, for years, for centuries, for someone to answer. You're the only species I've ever encountered that would rather risk annihilation than be alone. She reached out and touched his face just as she had before. But this time her hand was cool, almost cold. Don't lose that, she said. Don't let this place change you. The listeners are gone, but there are other things in the dark. Older things, hungrier things, and they're all afraid of the one thing you carry with you everywhere you go. What's that? Alara's smile widened, and for just a moment she looked like the woman she'd been before the Odysseus ever left Earth. Young, hopeful, alive, each other, she whispered. You carry each other, and nothing in this universe knows how to fight that. Her eyes closed, her hand fell, and Alara Vance, chief xenobiologist of the Odysseus colonization mission, finally died 200 years after everyone else. Kaylin held Mira as she wept, and he did not let go for a very long time. The journey back to civilization took 41 days. The Event Horizon's FTL drive was damaged from the dimensional collapse, forcing them to take the long way home. Kaylin didn't mind. It gave him time to think, to grieve, to process the impossible thing he'd done. Mira kept him grounded, as she always had, forcing him to eat and sleep and talk about anything other than the amber light. They delivered the medical supplies 3 weeks late. The colony administrator was furious. Kaylin apologized, accepted the pay cut, and did not mention the listeners or the breath or the woman who'd spent 2 centuries screaming into the void. But he thought about them, every day, every night, every time he passed a distress beacon, wondering if it was real or a trap or something in between. And one night, 6 months after the Odysseus, he heard it again. Not a breath, not a pulse, a voice. Young, terrified, broadcasting from an uncharted system on the edge of known space. This is the research vessel Magellan. Our crew has been compromised. Something got inside our heads, something that was waiting in the dark. Please, anyone, we don't know how much longer we can hold on. Kaylin looked at Mira. Mira looked at the beacon data. And for a long, terrible moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kaylin reached for the navigation controls. Plot the course, he said quietly. Someone's waiting for us. Mira didn't argue. She didn't cry or curse or question his sanity. She just put her hand over his on the controls and said the only thing that mattered. I know. The event horizon turned toward the uncharted system, toward the voice in the dark, toward whatever hungry thing was waiting there. And as the stars stretched into light around them, Kaylin Voss began to hum an old Earth song. Just in case the listeners were listening. Just in case something else was too. Just in case hope was the only weapon that had ever worked. End.